Need your daily fix on mixed martial arts?
We're going to kind of recap Bellator 155 from UFC 198.
Who's who?
Kind of a controversial decision.
And who's not?
I couldn't figure out why, and then it hit me.
Well, don't you fret, because Golden State Media Concepts got you covered. Get your daily dose of MMA podcasts. Everything from the UFC, Bellator Fighting Championships, Extreme Cage Fighting, Invicta Fighting Championships, and so much more. Join us as we talk about some of the biggest names in mixed martial arts. We've got you covered here on Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC MMA podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Arnel De Leon, and hopefully you are doing well for yourself. You, your friends, your family, whether you live in the States or internationally, I hope you are doing well for yourself. And so, UFC Fight Night just happened with the main event. Okay, not just the main event, but the entire card in itself. UFC Fight Night, which took place Saturday, August 22 at the UFC Apex Facility Building. You can watch it via ESPN Plus. I recommend everyone to go watch it, even though I'm kind of spoiling you what the results are. I still recommend people to go watch the show because from top to bottom, oh my goodness. So I'm looking at the main card here. There was one decision victory. Then we had ourselves 3 TKO KO victories that all ended just below 2 minutes. And then we also had Austin Hubbard against Joe Lasaki, which ended 3 minutes and 51 seconds into the first round via submission. So I'll be talking about all the fights here and what's at stake for each of these divisions right now and what's going to go on moving forward. So, Pedro Munhoz versus Frankie Edgar. This was easily the best fights of the entire night. It's a fight of the night candidate. Heck, I would even say it's a fight of the year candidate because it was that close and that good. So Frankie Edgar won the fight by split decision, and I disagree. I disagree off the basis that I really felt like Pedro Munhoz. Okay, so here's the scorecards. So it was 47-48 Frankie Edgar, 47-48 Munhoz, 49-46. No. Sorry for that error there. But it was 47-48 Edgar, 47-48 Edgar again, and then 49-46 Munhoz. So technically Munhoz got more points in total of the judges' scorecards here, but just more judges scored it leaning towards Frankie Edgar. And when I look at this fight, a lot of people on Twitter, because every time you watch the UFC events, in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you're going to go see people giving out their opinions, and you got fighters like Israel Adesanya, Aljamain Sterling. They're going to say, "Oh man, this is a close fight. Oh wow, 3-3. Oh wow, 2-1. Oh wow, 1-1." Or everyone's giving their viewpoint and opinion of the fight. And for the most part, people were saying, "Oh man, going to the 5th round, it was 3-1 in favor of Munhoz." And when I look at the fight stats, and when I look at the fight in a sense, I say Frankie Edgar definitely won the 2nd round. That is guaranteed. He 100% won the 2nd round. 1st round, complete toss-up. 3rd, 4th, 5th round, easily it was Munhoz. So why was it that why was it the judges scored it towards Frankie Edgar, and why is there a lot of people who are saying Frankie Edgar won the fight? Well, let me just tell you what the total strikes are. Pedro Munhoz landed 166 out of 350 strikes. Meanwhile, Frankie Edgar landed 135 out of 363 strikes. He had 1 takedown, but really the takedown really didn't matter all that much in the end, because Munhoz already stood up. I'm a firm believer that even if you were to go and get he had 2 takedowns, but the takedowns he had did so little in the actual grand scheme of the fights here that you could pretty much just toss it away because it was just really not important at all. So yes, Frankie Edgar technically got 2 takedowns here, but do the takedowns really count though if the other person's willing to stand up within the span of, 7 to 13 seconds? Because there was a little bit of ground pounding that Edgar did there, but it wasn't as significant as to the striking here. And I'm a firm believer that if you attempt a takedown and the other person stuffs it, they themselves should be rewarded. Because it's defense. And also, if you just take down a person, you shouldn't get points off that because you should be able to control the person. Yeah, because it's like, Davishvili, which is why I don't think Davishvili, who currently competes, I think in the bantamweight division now. Yeah, bantamweight division. And there's Davishvili, his entire shtick is just wrestling people and just doing takedowns, but he never really controls them. So he's getting some points he's getting points based on just accumulation of landed takedowns and even attempts of takedowns there. That's why I don't think he can do all that well once he gets to the top 10. When he fought against John Dodson, it was the most difficult fight he's had in his career. Not because Dodson was really tough to fight against, and the fact that his striking and like grappling ability was really good. More in the sense that Dvalishvili just couldn't control John Dodson after the takedown. Like Dvalishvili was beating Dodson every aspect of the fight game. It only sucked that when you look at the percentage of takedown attempts versus actual takedowns, it just doesn't look good on Dvalishvili's part. So I don't think it is fair for Frankie Edgar to go get points or to get, or to benefit from points or from the judges just because he gets 2 takedowns. I don't think so. And so now that we know that Pedro Munhoz had more total strikes, landed more total strikes, and just had better striking accuracy than Frankie Edgar, how do you lose? First round, Pedro Munhoz landed 30 of 64 compared to Frankie Edgar's 29 of 77. That first round was without a doubt the closest round out of all 5 fights. That could have been a complete toss-up, but in my viewpoint, here it is. If the stats are ever really, really close, then, you look at the actual fight and you say, okay, who are the ones dictating the pace? Who's the one applying the pressure here? And Pedro Munhoz, and it happens all the time, in a lot of fights, fighters are rewarded if they're the ones who are going on the offensive. There's a reason why a lot of counter fighters who don't end up scoring a knockout usually end up losing in the scorecards. And the reason for that is because judges reward fighters for being aggressive and for, constantly being on the offensive towards their opponent throughout the 5 rounds, throughout all 5 minutes of the fight. And so Pedro Munhoz, he landed 46% compared to Frankie Edgar's 37%. Frankie Edgar attempted 13 more strikes, but Pedro Munhoz landed 1+ more strike. So the stats are really close. It can be a toss-up, but I reward Pedro Munhoz based on how aggressive he is and how much he's dictating the pace of the fight. And it didn't look like Edgar's counterfighting all that much was really putting a dent onto Pedro Munhoz. It was mostly a case that Munhoz was being so aggressive that he was letting himself get hit in order for him to go for strikes. And then went to the second round. So by the second round, Pedro Munhoz was spent. He put a lot of energy into that first round. First round could have gone either way, but if you just look at both the fight stats and if you look with the eye test, Pedro Munhoz won the first round. Second round happened. Munhoz fought way more slower. Edgar fought a lot more consistently, and also he was doing a really good job in his combinations. When you look at both of these fighters here throughout all 5 rounds, Pedro Munhoz obviously landed the more harder hitting punches. Because when Edgar's all the strikes were all quick jabs. If you were to do a ratio between who landed more hooks, who landed more uppercuts, and who landed more jabs, Frankie Edgar landed, without a doubt, way more jabs than Pedro Munhoz. It's just that jabs are scored the same way people go score, hooks and uppercuts. But hey, I'm not a judge. I would definitely score hooks and uppercuts a lot more than jabs, but that's just me. So going to round 3, it was obviously Munhoz because third round, Frankie Edgar slows down a lot significantly in terms of his spacing and his combos. So and also it didn't help that Pedro Munhoz was always being the aggressor here. In almost every single combination, Munhoz was landing out this total more in accumulation. Also throughout all 5 fights here, Frankie Edgar landed little to no. Okay, I'm checking this now. Frankie Edgar, out of all the strikes he's attempted, he only landed 5% leg kicks. 5%. Compared to Pedro Munhoz's 26%. And although Frankie Edgar, his total strikes was 77% on the head, they're mostly jabs. Compare that to Pedro Munhoz, who was mostly focused on hooks, on uppercuts, and haymakers, a lot more devastating than Frankie Edgar. Although Frankie Edgar has an 18% more striking percentage towards the head, it shouldn't really mean that all the match. It really shouldn't. So going towards round 4, Frankie Edgar is really sluggishly, he's very slow. Edgar did a lot more better in the 5th round. But here's the thing, even though he was a lot more active in the 5th round, if you just look at the fight stats, and even with the eye test here in the fight stats, Pedro Munhoz landed 47 of 95 compared to Edgar's 33 of 83. So Munhoz landed 49% of his strikes compared to Frankie Edgar's 39. So if you just go purely by fight numbers, by fight stats here, the only round to which Edgar should have won was the second round. And if you were to go by the eye test, because if you just went by stats for Dominic Cruz versus Cody Garbrandt, or just the stats for Weili Zhang against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, the winners of those two fights should have been the losers. But if you watch the eye test, you'd be like, oh man, it's totally understandable why, Cody Garbrandt won the fight. Because although Cruz is doing a lot more better, all around in terms of just general strikes like body kicks, leg kicks, and doing some quick combos, Cody Garbrandt was winning the exchanges. It was really evident that Cody Garbrandt was stomping Dominic Cruz in his championship fight against him. And when you look at Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Weili Zhang, yes, Joanna Jędrzejczyk got more volume, but Weili Zhang's strikes just hit a lot more harder. And if you're to decide what matters more, someone having a cumulative strikes versus who actually hits harder, well, I look at it and I'm like, okay, who is more out of it, or who is more dazed, or who is being more damaged through those strikes? Are you more damaged through a 3-punch combination of Frankie Edgar, or are you more damaged by a one insanely hard-hitting hook by Pedro Munhoz? Alright then, so it all depends on you. But when you get to the 5th round and the 4th round, yes, Frankie Edgar was doing really good in his combos, but you also have to recognize this. Pedro Munhoz was moving his head a lot, and he was blocking a lot of those combinations. So yeah, Frankie Edgar was a lot more cleaner in his combinations. He was definitely attempting more combinations than Munhoz. It looked more better. But when you really focus in on it, how much of those strikes actually mattered? How much did it really matter? Not really all much. Not really. And so, Frankie Edgar won the fights, and I'm really unsure how to think about it. No, I am sure. I believe Pedro Munhoz should have won the fight. I believe Pedro Munhoz should have beaten Frankie Edgar. And even the fight, okay, so I got so Eric Colon, 47-48 Edgar, Derek Clary, 47-48 Edgar, and then Sal D'Amato, 49-46. There's a lot of inconsistencies right now in that judge's scorecard. I don't get how one judge can look at the fight and say, oh man, Edgar definitely lost 3 rounds. But then we can look at 2 other judges and they say, oh man, Edgar definitely won at least 1 round. 1 round more than Munhoz. I don't get it. I just really don't. Fight numbers say that Pedro Munhoz should have won the fight. And on top of that, if you just look at the eye test, Munhoz, I believe, just did better. And although I know Edgar, here's the thing, Dominic Cruz is full on Team Frankie Edgar all the way. I believe that because Dominic Cruz is like, yeah man, Edgar, he should go for the title fight because, the guy's an all-time great. He is a legend in the UFC, just like me. That's why I got my title fight. I don't know, he was super biased in that fight, and I find that very, very amusing. Although, I think it was by the end of the second. I don't know. There was a scenario to which I remember Munhoz did had a knockdown. Let me check the knockdowns here. So, oh wow. So neither fighter got a knockdown, but I remember Munhoz laid in a really good head kick on Frankie Edgar that stumbled him multiple times. And since Munhoz prefers fighting at the stand-up, he didn't really pressure on towards Edgar, but if he did pressure on Edgar, Edgar would have fallen back, and that would have guaranteed a round for Munhoz. But even then, Munhoz should have won the fight. Munhoz should have won the fight. And here's another issue. So, Pedro Munhoz is coming to the fight, was ranked number 5. He was ranked number 5 and fighting against Frankie Edgar, and this goes back to the idea that rankings don't really matter, because the truth is, rankings, for the most part, kinda matters. It's hard to argue for it. Does it make sense for Pedro Munhoz to fight against Frankie Edgar considering both of their standings in the bantamweight division? No. It doesn't make sense. Why is Pedro Munhoz ranked number 5 fighting against somebody outside the top 15? Well, listen to Dominic Cruz. Well, Frankie Edgar, he's a former world champion. He's been in the octagon longer than anyone else in terms of minutes, in terms of fight time. So Frankie Edgar, based on accolades and being in the UFC for a long time, should buy him, his place into fighting in the top 10 or top 5 of any division. And I completely disagree on that idea. I completely disagreed when Dominic Cruz fought against Henry Cejudo. I disagree with Frankie Edgar fighting against Pedro Munhoz. I disagree when Jose Aldo got a title fight despite coming off a loss. No, I don't believe it is right to award fighters based on accolades. Because if you're going to buy that logic, you could say Fabricio Verdum and Andrei Arlovski should surpass Francis Ngannou and even Daniel Cormier in terms of like why they should have been the ones to fight Stipe Miocic. That's not reward. That's not how it works. Fighters should be awarded based on recent performances, not based on what they did several years ago. And so you're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, coming back right after the short break here. See you soon.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And we are back. So I am discussing UFC Fight Night, Frankie Edgar versus Pedro Munhoz. Now let me talk about the rankings here. Oh boy, let me talk about the rankings here. My head hurts looking at the rankings right now. Because here's how it is. Frankie Edgar, despite coming into his fight against Pedro, Frankie Edgar, unranked Frankie Edgar, fought against Pedro Munhoz and is now ranked number 4 in the bantamweight division. Frankie Edgar is ranked number 4 in the bantamweight division, and also I'm looking at the bantamweight division right now, dude. There are so many L's. This division right now is just not healthy. It's not. Okay, so let's look at the top. We got Peter Yan, 7-0. 15-1 in his UFC in his overall career. Makes sense why he's ranked number 1. Marlon Moraes. He's going to fight against Corey Sandhagen. Marlon Moraes ranked number 2. It makes all of the sense in the world. He lost to Henry Cejudo in the title fight. He defeated Jose Aldo, who was fighting Peter Yan. So it makes sense why isn't Marlon Moraes fighting against Peter Yan? It could be travel issues. That makes all the sense in the world. It does. But alright then. Let's say travel issues were a thing. COVID. And Peter Yan just can't make it to the States to go fight against Marlon Moraes. Or there's a conflict of interest where both fighters just can't agree to it. Alright then. Even though Marlon Moraes should be fighting against Peter Yan, because of circumstances, he's right now going to be fighting number 9th rank Corey Sandhagen, and it pulls the heck out of me that Corey Sandhagen lost to number 3 ranked Aljamain Sterling recently by submission, and his reward for losing to Aljamain Sterling is now fighting against number 2 ranked Marlon Moraes. You don't get rewarded for losing. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And then we go to Frankie Edgar. Okay, Frankie Edgar. He defeated Pedro Munhoz. Good on him. He defeated against the top ranked fighter in Munhoz. Alright, good. Would I have not booked that fight in the first place? Yeah, I would not have booked that fight in the first place. I really wouldn't. But alright, Frankie Edgar. He is ranked number 4. He's ranked number 4. He lost. He's coming off 2 losses in a row. One of them was against Max Holloway. And then he lost to Chang Sung Jung. Not even a bantamweight. And now he's number 4 after his very close fight against Munhoz. Munhoz is coming off 2 losses in a row, Aljamain Sterling and Frankie Edgar. Now ranked number 5. Cody Garbrandt. Funny thing about Cody Garbrandt. Cody Garbrandt has fought a grand total once. Cody Garbrandt has fought a grand total of once in the UFC flyweight division. Why the heck does Cody Garbrandt, after going through a 3-fight losing streak, you go through a 3-fight losing streak, win 1 fight, and now all of a sudden, he has a title fight against Davison Figueiredo. Do I think Cody Garbrandt can defeat Davison? Yes! Cody Garbrandt can definitely 100% defeat Davison. Should Cody Garbrandt fight against Davison Figueiredo? No! Why is this man being rewarded a flyweight title fight when he fought once in a fight division? He defeated Rafael Assunção. Good on him. Actually, let me look at Assunção. Where was Assunção's rankings up until Davison Figueiredo? Guess what? Rafael Assunção isn't even in the top 10 of the men's flyweight division. So, but they competed at flyweight. That's the weird part about it. Cody Garbrandt competed at flyweight against another fighter who is not a flyweight, but was going off a winning streak in the bantamweight division. And when Cody Garbrandt defeated Rafael Assunção and talked trash to Davison via Twitter, then Cody Garbrandt gets a title fight against Davison. What is up with the bantamweight rankings here? And then we go down, Jose Aldo. Is Jose Aldo just being rewarded like legend points here? Is this how it works? Is it like the NBA All-Star game when they had Dwayne Wade and Dirk Nowitzki in the team, even though they had no reason for them being the All-Star team that one year? No. Jose Aldo. He's 10. Actually, let me look at Jose Aldo. What his like record has been in the past couple of years here. So Jose Aldo, because right now his recent record ain't all that well. He's been a 50-50 fighter since losing Conor. Right. So in the past 2 years, right? In the past 2 years, he is 2-3 in the UFC. 2-3. He is ranked number 7 in the UFC bantamweight division. Do you know what Jose Aldo record is in the bantamweight division? 0-2. The number 7th ranked fighter in the bantamweight division has won 0 fights in the bantamweight division. And not only that, his first fight was against number 2 ranked Marlon Moraes. And despite losing to Marlon Moraes, he somehow got his way into a title fight against Peter Yan. And I've heard Dominic Cruz and Joe Sonnen made this argument also. The legend accolade, because you're a legend, you should automatically be given title fights. GSP, no. I'm fine if it happens once in a while. Like, I didn't have a problem with Michael Bisping against GSP. I didn't have a problem with that. If GSP were to come back right now and fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov, I would be fine with that. I would. You know why? Because they're coming and going. Legends come and go. But you don't, over the course of years, consistently, while being an active member of the roster, the same thing applies for Cody Garbrandt. You don't get title fights off losing, and you don't get title fights off impressive performances. No, bantamweight division is comprised of fighters with so many L's in their recent performances. Frankie Edgar, Cody Garbrandt, Jose Aldo, Dominic Cruz. I know, Dominic Cruz. He's lost 1 fight. No, 2. I don't know why he says it 2. Okay, Dominic Cruz. He lost to Cody Garbrandt and Henry Cejudo, despite being inactive from the UFC for years. Number 8 ranked. Dang. Bantamweight, oh man. So I'm telling you right now, in 3 years time, this division better be cleaned up. Okay, Uriah Faber is ranked number 11. Why is Uriah Faber ranked number 11? Oh man, the dude's a pioneer of the bantamweight division. It doesn't matter. If Royce Gracie were to come back to UFC and mixed martial arts, he should be nowhere near any title. He shouldn't. Meanwhile, guys like Merab Dvalishvili is coming off a 4-fight win streak right now, murking people, and there's no fight coming up for him right now. It just makes, what? Just, oh man, it is so many things here are just whatever. And then we have Marlon Tito Vera, defeated Sean O'Malley. Do you know where Marlon Vera's ranking is right now? Number 18. Now, I know you're gonna say, well, Sean O'Malley was just a prospect when he fought against Marlon Vera, and also the foot injury and all that stuff. So really, okay, I'll tell you this now. If Sean O'Malley were to have defeated Marlon Vera, who would have Sean O'Malley fight next? Would he fight somebody in the top 10? Yeah. There's so much because if O'Malley defeated Vera, O'Malley would fight somebody in the top 10, and then he would be within the top 15 in rankings here. Marlon Vera, despite beating Sean O'Malley, is ranked number 18 in the UFC bantamweight division. Oh, he's like, where the heck is Ricky Simon? Isn't he like doing good for himself? Why is John Dodson? Like, why the heck is John Dodson higher than Marlon Vera, Cody Stamann, Rob Font? Why? Yudong Song he's 5-0. Yudong Song is 5-0 in the UFC. He's ranked number 17. Well, because John Dodson was like a really good fighter like 4 years ago? He automatically gets prepped up there he's automatically in the top 15? What? Oh man. It's a kangaroo court. That's what I'm gonna say now. It definitely does feel like kangaroo courts. And a lot of these rankings here is difficult to swallow. Number 10th ranked fighter, Jimmy Rivera, he got a victory. Okay, so I just said Cody Stamann. Cody Stamann right now in the UFC bantamweight division is ranked number 16. Can someone explain to me why Jimmy Rivera, off defeating Cody Stamann, is now ranked number 10, despite having 2 losses against Aljamain Sterling and Peter Yan? Yes, 2 stellar fighters, but the logic of why he is somehow above Cody Stamann by 5 spots makes no sense, considering that both of them, their records are pretty close also. Rivera is 7-3, Stamann is 5-2. Meanwhile, Uriah Faber is 11-7, and gosh darn it, he just recently lost his fight against Peter Yan. What's going on here? What the heck is going on? Alright. So, that right there is the UFC men's bantamweight division. Now I just want to talk about the flyweight division here, because I understand both divisions are all tipsy topsy right now. They don't make that much sense off the basis that Henry Cejudo retired both belts, and in Fire Island, both vacated belts rewarding new champions. Yeah. Makes sense. We got Brandon Moreno number 2, Justin Benavidez number 3. Even though Benavidez lost twice against Davison Figueiredo, he had a win streak going in. Askar Akarov is 2-0 in the UFC, but he's ranked already number 4, ahead of Alex Perez. Juicy Omega is coming off a losing streak, 9-7 in the UFC. He's currently ranked number 6. Why is he a top 10 fighter? Why? I'm looking at the UFC men's flyweight rankings right now. And a lot of it is just, a lot of it also just doesn't make any sense. And also there's a lot of inexperience happening here. It makes sense for Benavidez as to why he's ranked so high, considering that he's 15-5. But that's because he stands out as being a journeyman in the UFC. compared to the bantamweight division, where it's comprised of a whole lot of veterans in the UFC, but yet they're not making their way up in the rankings at all. Like Frankie Edgar, Aljamain Sterling, Jose Aldo, Uriah Faber, Rafael Sunsao, Rob Font, Marlon Vera. There are multiple veterans of the sports. But yet, Joseph Benavidez is ranked the highest. I guess because it's flyweight, so I guess different rules, flyweights, it kind of makes sense there. But for the most part here, when I look at the rankings here, a lot of it just doesn't make all that much sense. I'm also looking at the rankings here. So Tim Elliott, I am shocked that Tim Elliott still has a contract with the UFC. I know he came back from the Ultimate Fighter, good showing. He's 5-9. He somehow is a top 12 ranked fighter in the UFC, in the UFC's fight division, despite having a record of 5-9. Just go with that logic. Just go with it. And if you really think about it, it's kind of meh. We got a lot of matchups coming up in the UFC fight rankings here. Let me see if I can go. Okay, so we have Davison Figueiredo against Cody Garbrandt coming up on November 21st. Same card with Brandon Moreno against Alex Perez. So the winner of the Perez versus Moreno fight will fight the winner of Davison Figueiredo and Cody Garbrandt, because both of those fights are going to be happening on November. So good for that. We also have Kai Kara France against Brandon Royval coming up my birthday, 9/26, which is also headlined by Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa. And then we have Amir Albazi against Rauliana Paiva. I don't know much about these two fighters though, but their fight will be coming up on October 31st of 2020. So those are the major fights coming up in the UFC's flyweight division, and hopefully, once again, down the line, especially after COVID is over, everything can all be stabilized for the divisions and for the championships. You're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, coming back right after a short break here. See you soon.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play. This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And we are back. So I am discussing UFC Fight Night, Frankie Edgar versus Pedro Munhoz. Let's go to the rest of the card here. Co-main event, Marcin Marcheno against Mike Rodriguez. Oh man, this is fun. Fun, exciting fight here. Oh my goodness. I recommend everyone to watch this fight just because of how fun it was. So, Mike Rodriguez comes in, no fear, blazing through. He sees Marcin Prachnio. I can't really say his name correctly. Is that Prachnio? Because he goes into Marcin. Rodriguez comes in, throws everything he can, whether it be leg kicks, hooks, just underhooks, going for these crazy insane haymakers. It was a slugfest from beginning to end. Mike Rodriguez throws everything to the bone. And then we go to Marcin, who is fighting back. Here's the thing. Marcin fights back, throwing everything towards Rodriguez. So it looked like Rodriguez was like, oh man, look at Rodriguez throwing everything to Marcin. And then Marcin comes back, and he starts throwing everything to Rodriguez. And then and then 2 minutes and 17 seconds into the first round, Mike Rodriguez throws everything back into Marcin. Oh man, dude, knocks him out, goes in for the KO victory, and Mike Rodriguez wins the fight in a real stellar of a match. And then we just had Austin Hubbard against Joe Selecki. And in the fight here, Joe Selecki, really good grappling here, really good. So Hubbard came in, obviously going for a strike heavy, and then Selecki, and then they ended up clinching each other, which led to Joe Selecki working his way to the back mount of Austin Hubbard while Austin Hubbard was still standing. So what Selecki did was really interesting in that what a lot of fighters have a tendency of doing when they are in the back mount is that they try to drag all their weight down onto their opponent. What Selecki did instead was that he kind of attached himself. He wrapped his right leg behind the right knee of Austin Hubbard. So it went to the point where he was adding weight onto Austin Hubbard though, but he wasn't pulling him down, which could have been really bad. It could have been, I think it would be in a better position if Austin Hubbard just dropped down to his back, which led Joe Selecki kind of getting slammed, and Austin Hubbard can slowly work his way, because I think he was very struggling a lot, trying to go get Selecki off his back from standing position. And because Selecki was like, alright, I'm just gonna go and slowly work my way towards Austin Hubbard's neck from back position, from back mount position, and we're still standing here. If Austin Hubbard, if he just went back, did a slam with Selecki, he could have done better, but instead, Selecki, he grappled with him, got a rear naked choke, and he got a tight choke into the first round, 3 minutes and 51 seconds in, and he won via submission there. Really bad planning there by Hubbard. Impressive performance by Joe Selecki there, and really, really smart fight IQ by Selecki. Happy for them. And then the women's flyweight bout here. So Shayna Dobson was the plus 800 underdog. Plus 800 underdog. One of the biggest, without a doubt, it was the biggest underdog differential in the entire card. It was the equivalent of Felicia Spencer against Amanda Nunes on, oh man, we all know Amanda Nunes is going to win this fight. And in this fight, it was Maria Agapova, and a lot of people came into the fight, including me, that it would be Maria Agapova. Oh man, she's obviously going to defeat against Shayna Dobson. And although Shayna Dobson going into this fight was 3-4, unless you actually watch Shayna Dobson's fights, you know this girl is tough. Alright? She's not that easy to knock out, okay? She is a scrapper. She is a scrapper, and she's going to go for you against you all the way, going as much as you can. And for Maria Agapova, she pretty much burnt herself out in the first round. The bell rings. Maria Agapova does what she always does, especially Maria Agapova in her last fight against Hannah Cyphers. Except, unlike Hannah Cyphers, Shayna Dobson is a lot more tougher. So Maria Agapova, she goes in, uses her insane reach advantage, just picking apart Shayna Dobson throughout the entire first round. But, let me look at the total strike numbers here. Okay, so it makes sense here. So Maria Agapova landed more strikes, attempted more strikes, landed more significant strikes, and attempted more significant strikes than Shayna Dobson. But how did Maria Agapova lose? Well, first round, Agapova throws everything but the kitchen sink onto Shayna Dobson. Shayna Dobson is able to pull off some really good, like counter punches, and it led to Maria Agapova shouldn't do grappling, just to be honest with you. Shayna Dobson herself isn't all that good at grappling. Okay, so both of these fighters don't excel all that well in terms of the grappling. It wasn't the prettiest grappling match to look at. It wasn't the best wrestling to watch. But these two, with the wrestling ability they have, Shayna Dobson just outdid Maria Agapova just a little. And then it got to the second round, and then just, Shayna Dobson just started doing some ground pound onto Maria Agapova. And it came, honestly, it was more of Maria Agapova gassing out and getting really tired and just dropping her arms down, more so than what Shayna Dobson just outstriking her. Because, to be honest with you, Maria Agapova outstrikes Shayna Dobson. Even though Shayna Dobson won this fight, I'm gonna say, who is the better striker? Maria Agapova. Who has better cardio and had a better game plan going to this fight? Shayna Dobson. Maria Agapova, she's only in her early 20s, so she has a long ways to go until she makes her way into the top 10 of the women's fight division right now. But man, it was I'm pretty sure the UFC really wanted Maria Agapova to win. I wanted Maria Agapova to win so I can go see her matchups against other fighters. But yeah, it is a really big learning curve for Agapova. She came to the fight with the wrong strategy, gassed out against someone as tough as Dobson, and there was a lot of overconfidence coming from Agapova's camp, a lot of patience coming in from Dobson's camp, being like, alright then, don't get overwhelmed, be patient, fight smart, go find openings. And that's what Dobson did. She found her opening against Agapova, and Dobson's strategy really was, let Agapova throw everything at her in the first round, because by the end of the first round, despite the fact that they're both on the ground. Despite Agapova laying in more strikes and doing more work than Dobson, when the bell rang, Dobson immediately got up. She just woke up out of bed and she had a really good sleep. Maria Agapova was still on her knees in the center of the octagon, breathing heavily. And it didn't look good. It was from that moment on, it was me and Dominic Cruz spotted it, where it was it didn't look good that Maria Agapova took her time just trying to stand up after the first round. Didn't look good, and it didn't transition well for Maria Agapova once she got to the second round. A lot of overconfidence from her parts. Didn't look good, but heck, that's just how things are. And we have Daniel Rodriguez against Dwight Grant, ended in the first round, 224 also. Really fun, stellar fight with Rodriguez coming in as the underdog, coming into the fight. A lot of people thought Dwight Grant was going to win the fight, and Dwight Grant just overwhelmed. It was very similar to Marcin Preciado against Mike Rodriguez. For Daniel Rodriguez, he didn't let Dwight Grant come in for the comeback. Instead, Daniel Rodriguez was able to push back, and he was able to fight back against Dwight Grant without Dwight Grant coming in for a second win, and he knocked out Dwight. So in the end, when I look at all the fights in this card here, fun fights from beginning to end. Only problem watching the show was the fact that the fights were so short, but the commercials were longer. I would argue that the commercials were longer than all the fights in this entire card combined. Heck, I would even say that the entrances and the build-up, the build-up video, and both fighters making their way to the octagon was longer than all the fights in this card come together in terms of pure runtime. So, you know what? I'm happy that these fighters were able to clean up the fights really good, because I'm going to be honest with you, I was really tired when I watched this ESPN event, and I was so happy that every fight was knockout, submission, knockout, and then a scrap fight between Pedro Munhoz and Frankie Edgar. So I'm happy about that, because I was getting really tired by then. It was on a Saturday night, a really busy Saturday night for me. So the more time less time given to these fighters, and them finishing the fight as early as they can, more time for me to go to bed and sleep, because I was a proper tired person when I got to this card. Well, let's talk about the next UFC Fight Night event happening. It's coming up 5 days from now, from the day of this recording. It's coming up this Saturday, August 29. We have Anthony Lionheart Smith against Alexander Rakic. Honestly, I'm not all that familiar with Rakic's work, but I do know that he is 12-2, and he's coming off a set of really impressive victories. Also, Robbie Lawler against Neil Magny. Thank goodness, one of my favorite fighters to watch is Neil Magny. Neil Magny, he's one of those fighters who I followed dating back to his time in the Ultimate Fighter, and I put a whole lot of stock onto Neil Magny, because I really believe he's got so much potential. And Neil Magny, who is Neil Magny's past fight? Because I know Neil Magny, he wasn't really doing that well for himself, and then he took a break from mixed martial arts, trying to rehab the re-injury, and then, so he came from the Nelson versus Carwin camp. Alright, so Neil Magny was pushed very quickly during his time immediately after the UFC Fight Night events, only Ultimate Fighter events. He was presented fighters against Lawrence Larkin, Rafael dos Anjos, peak Rafael dos Anjos. So it just didn't look for him. He lost against Santiago Pozovino. But then, so his last loss was in November 17, 2018, to which he was the main event. He lost that main event fight after 4 rounds of action via KO. And then he had 2 really good performances in his 2 comeback fights, which were against Li Zhongyang and Anthony Rocco Martin. His Anthony Rocco Martin performance was, oh man, great. It was absolutely stellar. We are currently seeing the best version of Neil Magny that we've ever seen. And in fact, what ranking is Neil Magny right now? I think Neil Magny right now is ranked in the top 10 of the welterweight division. He's just in the top 10. He needs about 3 more victories in order to go cement himself into being either a more contender or getting that title fight. Finally, because I've been watching Neil Magny for a long time, and I want him to succeed. I really do. He's fighting against Robbie Lawler, and the mystique behind Robbie Lawler has pretty much been gone for me. I know Robbie Lawler, people still bring up his fight against McDonald, but Robbie Lawler's, his performances weren't all that well. He fights, despite his nickname, Ruthless Robbie Lawler, and him being a great striker, and him being known for this, like him and Anthony Smith are in the same corner, in that these 2 tough fighters who refuse to get knocked down, who previously get knocked down, who have strong performances, who are known for performances to which they are just warriors who just can't be put down. Both of them are just not doing well for themselves recently. It's surprising considering that both Anthony Smith and Robbie Lawler are both coming off losses, but they're both coming in but they're both the main event and their main event, which is, polar opposite of Alexander Rakic and Neil Magny. Neil Magny's getting a second win in his career, and Alexander Rakic right now seems like his stock is rising up. So Anthony Smith and Robbie Lawler, I'll be honest with you, if you are a betting man, you bet on Rakic and you bet on Neil Magny. You go against the fan favorites here in both of these fights, because when I look at Smith and Robbie Lawler's recent performances, where they get tired out really easily and they fight very passive and they develop themselves into being counter fighters. They develop into counter fighters who just don't engage all that well, who are not good in their timing, or they don't engage enough with their opponent for them to go rack up any points when they go by decision. They let themselves get hurt way too much, and if they let themselves get hurt way too much, they fight very passive. So do not bet money on Anthony Smith and Robbie Lawler. Two fan favorites, definitely. Two stellar athletes, without a doubt about that. But it just doesn't seem safe to go bet money on those two fighters. We have Alexa Grasso versus Ji-Yeon Kim. Their fight was supposed to take place, I think, back in June. And then it got scrapped. And this is either the second or third time this fight has been remade. The story of the fight here is not whether or not Ji-Yeon Kim is good enough to defeat Alexa Grasso, or if Alexa Grasso is good enough to defeat against Ji-Yeon Kim. The story of this fight is, can Ji-Yeon Kim make weight? Because she struggled in her past 3 weight cuts. She didn't make weight in her past 2 fights, and the third fight on that, she pretty much had a hard time trying to make weight, and she ended up losing her fight. So, Ji-Yeon Kim, you better please go make weight. I still remember Dana White saying the worst thing that can happen in a UFC card is if a fighter is catchweight fights. Dana White says himself he hates catchweight fights because they don't mean anything. And I agree with Dana White. Catchweight fights don't mean anything. No one benefits from a catchweight, kind of. So the fighter who ends up defeating the fighter who just didn't make the weight, they get 20% cut. Alright, that's good and all, but considering the fact that these fighters don't make all that much money in the first place, 20% of $30,000 to $60,000 isn't all that much. It just really isn't. And you're not making your way up in the rankings, so your potentials to go make even more money is stalled out. It's just stalled out. So, Ji-Yeon Kim, please, go and make some money. I mean, go make weight so both of you fighters can fight at a normal weight class at flyweight, so your potential to go make money rises. Win, lose, you guys both make your money, alright? And both of you move your way up in the rankings. You just do it. Especially in the flyweight rankings now, where the current flyweight rankings are very stale. It's very kind of meh right now in the fact that people are just not moving up all that much, with the exception being Cynthia Calvillo. The top end of the flyweight rankings is pretty much static, so there definitely needs to be some new blood going to the top 5 of the flyweight division. And so you are listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, coming back right after a short break here. See you soon.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
And we are back. So that was UFC Fight Night, Munhoz against Frankie Edgar. So let's go to the news break here. So what's going on in the world of MMA? Well, first of all, Dana White says Scott Coker's best light heavyweight claim is cute. Super fights, dumbest idea ever. So to those who are unaware who Scott Coker is, he is the president for Bellator. UFC President Dana White scoffed at a statement from Bellator President Scott Coker at the Viacom CBS Own promotion will promote the sport's best light heavyweight after champ John Jones moves up in weight. Isn't he cute? White said in response to Bellator's characterization of Friday's light heavyweight title fight between now former 2-division champion Ryan Bader and Vadim Nemkov, who dominated the UFC dominated the UFC vet to capture his first major title at 205 pounds. Asked later about the possibility of co-promotion, something the UFC has done only once in its history for a boxing one-off with the money fights, White doubled down and took another shot at Bellator. Everybody they have in their light heavyweight division, we let go of. He's got the best light heavyweight division? ? We let those guys all go. It's like the most dumbest thing I've ever heard. But I get it. He's gonna try to effing do this thing. I'm not blanking on him. I'm not, on him. He's gotta try to do his thing. He's gotta try to sell fights. The way you don't sell fights is, oh, I've got the best light heavyweight division in the world. Everybody that was there was let go from here. That's a pretty silly statement. Several top Bellator fighters in the light heavyweight division are UFC veterans, including Ryan Bader, Phil Davis, Lyoto Machida, who also competes at middleweight. By Lyoto Machida, he looks great, by the way. Looks absolutely stellar. And most recently, Corey Anderson, Corey Anderson, didn't he ask for his release from the UFC? Corey Anderson, in my opinion, is in the same level as fighters like Dominic Reyes and Thiago Santos. I really believe he's that good and he's near that level. It is Corey Anderson, he left because of monetary issues here. He wasn't being paid enough money in the UFC. And on top of that, there's more opportunities to go expand on your brand and to expand on the sponsorships and advertising with Bellator than you are with the UFC. Is the UFC a big organization? 100%. UFC is a much more bigger organization than Bellator and even won championships. The only problem though is that the organization is making a lot of money. The fighters are not. So one notable exception is Nemkov, who initially won notice in Ryzen before moving to Bellator. The 20-year-old Russian has won 5 straight fights in his current promoter, but he's overall faced a lower caliber of opposition when compared to Jones, who's dominated who's who of top light heavyweights over the past decade. Ryan Bader cast Friday's fight as a contest for the number 1 spot in the world, with Jones possibly moving up to heavyweight. After his upset win, Nemkov paid his respects to his UFC counterpart, but indicated he agreed with Bader's statements. I feel like I'm number 1 right now, Nemkov said at a post-fight presser. To back up why I'm saying this, I didn't just go through 5 rounds of action, I finished a top contender in a decisive manner in 2 rounds. Yikes. There's him challenging out John Jones, because John Jones, he's just like Chris Cyborg is transitioning away from the knockout artist and the very flashy fighter into a fighter who fights a lot more safe and a lot more passive nowadays. So that kind of is a jab on John Jones that he's turning more of a score fighter. Not only him, Amanda Nunes is also turning to that fighter, the score-based fighting champion. It makes sense as to why you're going to do that, but still. So it is coming. Better loses 25,000. Biggest UFC upset since round. Oh, so this is coming in from Yahoo Sports, and it was the bet on Maria Agapova versus Shayna Dobson. So remember, Shayna Dobson came into that fight plus 800. Plus 800. One of the biggest upsets in UFC history if you were to go purely based on betting odds. So someone bet $25,000. He went negative there. But here's what I believe. If you have the gall to bet that much money, I can guarantee you that person's already pretty rich as it is already, and he can make back the $25,000. Either that or you're super desperate. That's what I'm saying. So this is coming in from MMAmania.com. Unlike Francis Ngannou, Stipe Miocic doesn't think heavyweights will be easier for John Jones. So Dana White, once again, he clarified that it's going to be Stipe Miocic against Francis Ngannou. And Stipe Miocic himself, when asked about, hey, should he fight against John Jones? Stipe Miocic also believes that John Jones should go through a period of time fighting at heavyweight. So Stipe Miocic goes on to say, I think heavyweights might be even easier for John Jones than light heavyweight, and Ngannou recently said in an interview with ESPN, obviously heavyweight they hit harder, but it's not the same technique, it's not the same fight IQ. Current heavyweight champion Stipe Miocic kindly disagrees. During his chat with ESPN's Mark Raimondi, Miocic said that while he agrees Bones has great technique and is very fluid with his actions, he still has to be careful he doesn't get tagged by one clean shot by the much bigger foes. Listen, we're big boys with smaller gloves. It just takes one punch. I don't care if you don't hit hard. You can still get caught, and I don't care who you are. I said the current 65-pound champion. Here's the thing. Stipe Miocic is a small heavyweight. Like, he is significantly smaller than the rest of the heavyweights, though. He's still pretty big, though, on the scale, but he's a lot more leaner, and one could argue that if Stipe Miocic really tried. He could be a light heavyweight. He really could. I look at my first fight against DC. I've been hit with everything and they didn't go down, but DC caught me a shot I didn't see and I went down. So I don't think it'll be that much easier, especially when you have all that weight to worry about. It's not 205 and you got guys up to 265, if not bigger, who don't weight cut at all. Still, Jones has yet to be knocked out though, which is true. He's got great technique, so it's definitely going to help him. He is very fluid in what he does. He added, he has a great game plan every time he fights. It's a good thing, to have a good plan every time you walk into a fight. Alright then, so Miocic is kind of doubting Jon Jones here. I think Jon Jones would be great. It all depends on the matchups here. Let me look at the UFC heavyweight rankings here. Who should Jon Jones face? Obviously, one could argue that he should immediately fight for the title. You know, he is the GOAT of the light heavyweight division, arguably the GOAT of mixed martial arts. So it makes sense for Dana White to be like, oh yeah, obviously Jon Jones, he should get a title fight against Miocic here. But let's look at his matchups here. So, Alexei Oleinik versus Jon Jones, that would be a fun one. Fabricio Verdum against Jon Jones, another fun one. Alistair Overeem versus Jon Jones, another good one over there. So, I believe he can definitely take on guys like Curtis Blades. He can take on Curtis Blades, Gisena Rosenstrikes, the JDSs. Derek Lewis against Jon Jones would be amazing to see, just because of how bizarre contrast it is to see, you know, weirdo Derek Lewis with like, you know, all-time great champion Jon Jones, if they have a fight here. But, Jon Jones, I think he would struggle mightily against if he were to fight a wrestler at heavyweights. That's what I believe. Daniel Cormier has this problem, like he's had this problem, where he's very over-reliant on his striking. Great grappler, one of the best grapplers in all of UFC history, but he has such an overconfidence in his striking that he just prefers striking when he can. It's when he recognizes that he can land some clean punches. That's when he's dedicated to the striking aspect. Because when he fought against Derek Lewis, he came to the conclusion that, okay, there's no way I can land a clean shot onto Derek Lewis without Derek Lewis just stopping me, okay? It's not gonna happen. I'm a firm believer that Derek Lewis is arguably the hardest hitting heavyweight in all of the UFC right now. All of it. Derek Lewis hits harder than Miocic. He hits just as hard as Francis Ngannou. Sadly, we didn't see that Ngannou-Derek Lewis fight. That fight ended up being an absolute disaster of a fight. But we know that those two fighters, when things get turned on, they are both stellar fighters. So, Jon Jones moving up to heavyweight, it makes sense. I mean, one could argue that Daniel Cormier, Stipe Miocic could have said the same argument for Daniel Cormier, and that there's no way Daniel Cormier would do well for himself in the heavyweight division because of the fact that he just can't handle the striking of the big boys, while he knocked out Stipe Miocic, who's one of the best strikers in the UFC, and is the GOAT for the heavyweight division. So I think Jon Jones is definitely top 5 rank. As long as Jones avoids fighting certain fighters, like if he avoids the Alexei Oleinik and the Verdums of the UFC, then that'd be one thing. I would love to see Alexander Gustafsson and Jon Jones go at it at heavyweight. I think it'll be very different. It'll be a very different scenario how those two fights, because Alexander Gustafsson, although he lost against Verdum in his heavyweight debut, looked really great. He looked awesome. He looked just as fast and looked just as smooth as he was at light heavyweight. It is Verdum. He came into the fight, you know, cause Verdum in his last bout against Alexei Oleinik looked very bad. And so there was a lot of people, including Alexander, who was underwhelmed by Verdum and then was like taken off guard when they recognized that Verdum came to the fight against Alexander Gustafsson really, really in good shape. And so for the final news piece of the day here, we got here, Israel Adesanya tells Costa to behave himself during fight week. I've got the gang with me. Alright then, sure. So this is coming in from BloodyElbow.com. Israel Adesanya sends a stern warning to Paulo Costa ahead of UFC 253. So Israel Adesanya wants Paulo Costa on his best behavior ahead of UFC 253, warned the Brazilian that things could get physical if he tries anything stupid during fight week. Adesanya, who has labeled Costa a big inflated ignoramus with one of the dumbest fighting styles in the sport, sent a stern warning to the undefeated contender ahead of their middleweight title bouts. I've got the gang with me, so if he wants to try something stupid with white glasses and effing cringe king, whoever. Bring it to my gang versus your gang, but I'd rather whoop your butt in the cage. Adesanya told Submission Radio in a recent interview. The Last Stop Banner has promised a Shadow of the Year performance. Shadow of the Year performance. Wow, okay. Shadow of the Year performance against Paulo Costa at UFC 253, with Adesanya claiming that he will make a fool of Costa by exposing how one-dimensional and dumb he really is. I think a performance of the year, Shadow of the Year, Shadow of the Year maybe, Fight of the Year, I already had that in my back pocket, but if it happens again, I just don't think it's going to happen just because of the situation. You have to be smart enough to put it together. This guy gasses after the first round. I highly disagree with that. We've got 5 rounds. Look at me in all my fights. In the 5th round, in the 4th round, the 3rd round, the later rounds, I'm always fresh. So yeah, precision is going to be the key in this fight. Precision, skill, just taking him out one by one. Will this be Paulo Costa's first ever 5-round fight? I feel like he's made invented Fight Night cards though. But I disagree with Israel Adesanya. I know that's just him blowing smoke and him just saying, hey man, like, Paulo Costa, man, he's trash. So, okay, so I am right. So the longest fight Paulo Costa's ever been in was his fight last year against Yoel Romero that went 3 rounds. And it was a stellar fight to watch, Paulo Costa and Yoel Romero, because you got 2 fighters who claim to be 185 when they really shouldn't be. You got 2 of these, like, muscle-bound statues here. It was a fun fight, and the interesting thing about that fight was that Paulo Costa came into that fight with a lot of people predicting, oh man, he's gonna gas out, because prior to that fight, he only makes it up to the 2nd round. He's gone through the 1st round, wait, let me get this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So he's had 9 first round finishes. He's made to the 2nd round 3 times, and then he capped out at the 3rd round once. So, Paulo Costa, yeah, he doesn't have a history of fighting long fights. But then again, if you look at his performance against Yoel Romero, Paulo Costa was very consistent through all 3 rounds of action. He was incredibly consistent, and he was able to maintain the same pace of striking throughout all 3 rounds of action here, that I won't be surprised if that fight was a year ago. Paulo Costa has trained. If you look at his fight camp and his gym videos, he looks really great, and his coach is emphasizing the concept of cardio and going beyond just making this, fight end in the 1st round, 2nd round, 3rd round. Paulo Costa expects this fight to end, by decision. He says it's going to be a long fight. Could go 4th, could go 5th. He expects that. And so, this fight, in my opinion, how I'm predicting right now, is definitely going to go 5 rounds of action, and one of these fighters are going to win by decision. I don't think either fighter is going to get knocked out. I think Paulo Costa is not going to gas out. I think Israel Adesanya is more likely to gas out than Paulo Costa. I'm being that honest with you. He moves significantly a lot more slower. Maybe because there's more evidence showing Israel Adesanya gassing out more so than Costa, because Costa has only really gassed out once, and it was only in the very end of his fight against Yoel Romero. So Israel Adesanya versus Yoel Romero, that fight is going to be happening on my birthday, September 26th. It's going to be a real fun one for that fight. I say that fight is going to end by decision. I don't see either side losing via submission or by a TKO or knockout. And also, Dana White, whenever he says, oh man, this fight's going to be a fight of the year, I believe this will be a fight of the year candidate. Paulo Costa versus Israel Adesanya. You know what? Both these fighters had very different fights against Yoel Romero, and I think style-wise, these fighters match each other perfectly with one another. And that brings to a close for today's podcast. You have been a great audience. All I gotta say is thank you. Thank you for listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.